Welcome to Podcast Answers, the show where I help people start and grow their podcast, answering any podcast questions along the way. If you have a question, please reach out and get in touch with me, podcastanswers.com/contact, and I would love to help you answer any questions that you have about podcasting. Last episode, we talked about seasons, why you should have them, should you have them, should you not have them. If you've not listened to that, go to podcastanswers.com/seasons, and you will, the episode we were talking about, you'll see that and be able to listen to why I think you should or should not have seasons. But without further ado, this episode, we're going to be talking about having your own .com. In the words of the great Todd from Blueberry, get your own .com. Todd seems to be always on getting your own .com, and I agree with Todd. I am gonna be somebody who always thinks that having your own .com is a good thing. So what are some reasons to have your own .com? So you have a home place where people can find you. So if you live in an RV, no one knows where you're at. They may have an address for you right now, but what if you move tomorrow? They're not going to know where to reach you. So what are they going to do when you move? Same thing with podcasting. You can tell people that you are at podcastname.podcasthost.com for your show notes and stuff. And even, I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast from. But what happens when you move podcast host? That podcastname.podcasthost.com is not going to lead to your show notes anymore. Or worse yet, what happens if you get kicked off of Spotify or Apple Podcasts? It does happen. And people may not know this, but Apple Podcasts is the directory that a lot of other apps use to pull podcasts from. So if you get kicked out of Apple, then you're out of a lot of apps. When they search for you in a lot of different apps, they're not going to find you. If they know your own .com, they can always come to that and find you. So even if you get kicked off of Apple Podcasts, they can know to go to podcastname.com and find you there, because you will always be there, and you will always, your stuff will always be there. The other nice thing is you don't always need to say, come find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at in your podcast. You can just say, go to podcastname.com, and all the places you find audio are linked there. So that if you have anything new, you can list it right there. It's not going to change your audio. You don't have to go back in and tell somebody that you're now on the hottest new app or whatever. You can always just say, go to podcastname.com and find all of our audio there. If you have your own website, you can also do things like have really easy names to remember your episodes by. Like, for instance, I said this last one was podcastanswers.com/seasons. That's a really easy way to, if you're listening to me right now, you can go, I want to listen to that. And it's really easy to remember /seasons. And you can get to the show notes post for that episode, which has a link to it has a link to the audio in it, as well as being able to just easily see other things that I may put there that are not in the RSS feed. If you have your own website, you can do other things too, like welcome messages and more. It's like you could have on your homepage of podcastname.com, you could have a video welcoming people to your show. People connect with video. People love seeing people on video. They may connect with them via audio and being right in their ears, but when they see them, they feel like they really, really, really know the person. They've seen what it looks like, what the person looks like. They've seen what it exactly means to have what the host looks like. And you can also have memorable short links too. Like, for instance, podcastanswers.com/captivate will take you to my very favorite podcast host. Or podcastanswers.com/eCam will take you to my favorite software for streaming video, which I'm doing right now. I believe heavily in doing video and audio at the same time. So that way you have it. And so both of those are short links, and they're affiliate links of mine, which I will make a commission for if any of you buy from Ecamm or Captivate. But the nice thing about having your own website is that it's memorable. You don't need to say, go to bit.ly/whatever or some other random link to get to the, if you're having a short link or whatever, or your other website trying to take people off their websites. You can do that right from your own website. And you're driving people back to your brand. You're not driving them to something that's not yours, like Bitly, or, even going back to the Apple Podcasts thing. You're not telling them, go to Apple Podcasts to find me. You're saying, come to podcastanswers.com to find the podcast, to find all of the information you're ever going to need for the podcast. And again, you can do those memorable short links, which are easy to remember because you already know. If I've already drilling into you and into your head, podcastanswers.com, 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 you're going to know that when I'm talking about something like Ecamm, you can go to podcastanswers.com/Ecamm and get there. So how do you get your own .com or .org or .whatever, your domain name? You can go to any domain registrar. I like GoDaddy. Just because I've been using them forever, but you can go to any registrar, domain registrar, and get your domain there. It'll cost you somewhere between $15 and $20 a year. That's just for the name. That's not for any website space. That's not for anything like that. It's just for the domain name. Now, once you have that, though, you can do and use it however you want. And there's lots of different ways to use that. And so I'm going to talk you through a little bit of those ways to use your domain, because really you can do anything you want with it. Many podcast hosts, and this is maybe the easiest thing to do, many podcast hosts allow you to map their podcast name .podcasthost.com, which would be your show notes and your show page, to a custom domain. Now each people do it a little bit different. They may charge you for this, they may not, but each one will have their own instructions on how to go into your registrar, so in my case, GoDaddy, and point it to their server and allow you to change that so that you can get podcastname.com, and it takes you essentially to podcastname.podcasthost.com. I'm saying a lot of dots and .coms in here, but follow me here. So it's nice because it looks that you don't know when you go to that it's actually going to some other website. You don't know that it's not something you're hosting. It doesn't really matter because they're just going to see the podcastname.com. Even though you are using their website, if you decide to move hosts, then all you have to do is point your domain to a new host. And the address that the listeners come to is going to be the same. So for instance, if I were doing that and I was using my podcast host to host my website or my show notes, and I'm with Captivate now, but if I were using them and I had podcastanswers.com pointing to their webpage, their show page, all I could, if I decided to go somewhere else, I could really easily change somewhere else and not affect anybody else. You wouldn't know the difference. It may look different, but the place that you're going to go is always the same. It's always going to be podcastname.com, podcastanswers.com, whatever. If your podcast host does not allow you to custom map your domain name to their site, you can always redirect your domain, to their given site. So if you visit podcastname.com in the URL bar, you'll be redirected to podcastname.podcasthost.com. Make sure that you do a 302 or a 307 redirect, though. There are many types of redirects, and the 302 and 307 are what are called temporary redirects. You will want to do this because if you choose a permanent redirect, your browser will remember the location that you're forwarded to, and it will no longer hit the server to check if the URL redirect is the same. So let's say you move hosts and you change your redirect to the new host. If you use a permanent redirect, then your browser will automatically go to the old host and not check if there's the new one. But with a 302 or 307, every time someone hits it, they're going to go out to that where it's forwarded from and check and see if it's still valid. And the last way to do it is actually have your own web hosting. This is going to be the most flexible, but it is going to cost you a little bit more for the hosting. With your own web host, you can put other files down for download, You can offer more things. Your website is truly yours. It's truly your digital space, and you can do with it what you want. So you can go to any web host and do that. Now you're going to need a different web host from a MP3 host for your podcast, because most web hosts aren't going to want to serve MP3 files from their website and they'll kick you off. So you will need a podcast host still, but the nice thing about having your own website is it is truly yours. You can make it look the way that you want, because if you go with the podcast host's site, most of them are pretty great, but they're going to look the same. They're going to look mostly the same. You can't do a whole lot of configuring on them. So if you have your own website with your own .com, you truly own that digital space, and you can really do anything you want with it. So in closing, if all of this is too much for you and you want help doing it, I am available for contact. I can do one-on-one consulting. Just contact me at podcastanswers.com/contact, and I would love to work with you, help you start and grow your podcast, help create a look for you and a website for you, and help you even map your own domain. Also, make sure that you subscribe to our website, our YouTube channel, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@podcastanswers. We not only post our weekly podcast video there, but we are also doing other training videos and tip videos and things like that. So make sure that you hit that, because it'll allow you to always get the latest stuff.